think those of us, all of us in this room, right, we come to this conference because we're all here because we're committed to gender equity and we work on these issues all the time. When we think about the frame of what do we need to do in order to really achieve this sort of elusive idea of equality, right? We think of it in three ways, really. I mean, all of the, the UN, all the Millennial Development Goals, everything else, all the sort of like global commitments, the WEF and all the organizations that look at gender equity really roughly break down their commitments or their measures of gender equity across three basic categories, right? The personal, the professional, and the political. Right? In order for women to have equality, full access to, equality in any society, they have to have equality in all three of those things. On the personal front, are they able to fulfill their potential as a human, to get access to the kinds of educational and personal opportunities, to live free from violence, to live in an environment where they can fulfill their hopes and dreams, whatever those might be? That's the personal. The professional is, can they make a living? Can they support their families? Can they have access to the same work opportunities that men may have, fulfilling their own professional aspirations, the ability to live in freedom economically, right? And then the third, which I will just say that certainly in the United States has been the one at the absolute bottom of the list, which most women of my generation have completely ignored for the last 40 years, is the political. And that is the extent to which women are equally represented in the seats of power at the decision-making table, are ensuring that public policy in their communities is reflective of their issues. Now, just for context, according to the WEF, right now the United States is 98th in the world for women's political parity. 98th. Right? So there are 97 other countries in the world that are doing better than the United States in terms of women's political power, and we're 51st in the world overall across all of those measures. But the reason why, Me Too, the sexual harassment issue, violence against women matters so much is because it touches all three of those. It speaks to the ability of someone to fulfill their full potential as humans. The reality is that most women who experience some sort of workplace harassment, they are never able again to work in their chosen field or profession. Their ability to fulfill their full potential as a human is drastically limited because they are dealing with and coping with violence against them. And then, of course, the political piece is a massive part of it. So you look at those three, the fact is that many women who have experienced harassment or violence against them have been silenced in our political process. So part of what we do at All In Together is we're actually actively out training survivors on political leadership. Because, in the US, it's 1 in 3 women at a low estimate, 1 in 3, and those women are less likely to stand up and speak up and participate politically and to shape the very public policy that would affect their ability to thrive in those other two domains. And when you look across the world, you really see this sort of consistent picture of, violence and harassment holding women back, preventing them from fulfilling their full potential, blocking their access to economic opportunity and professional growth, and then keeping them on the sidelines in the political process. Yeah. And that is a negative spiral that has got to be broken. And it is going to take, not just women in the workplace stepping up and saying this is unacceptable, but it is absolutely going to take public policy and political solutions as well. So the thing that makes this issue so knotty is this intersection of all three of these issues that come together, in this one enormously difficult topic. And I don't want to go on too long, but I will just say, I think that it's hard to point to any issue in a sense that has more and broader impact than, violence against women. And we don't always put the Me Too idea and violence against women in the same category. And I think you sort of put it that way, and it's correct. It is correct. It is a kind of violence against women, right? It may not always be physical violence. In many instances it is. It's emotional violence. It is in the same category. It is an act of aggression that is keeping women from fulfilling their potential as humans. And so I think that the workplace piece of it is one part of it, but I get very worried, especially in the US, when, God bless, Lean In and Sheryl Sandberg, but I get very distressed when the conversation starts going to a conversation about what are we doing at, the top 100 corporations, which employ a tiny percentage of the women that are affected by this stuff and largely speaks to wealthy people, right? That is a piece of the solution, but it is critical that we expand the lens because, I'll tell you, the farm workers picking strawberries in California who are disproportionately affected by this are not part of that ecosystem. So, and that's true around the world. Look, we have had a narrative, and I thought you really hit the nail on the head with that. We have had a narrative that is enabling men who behave in atrocious ways to be set up as victims of an unfair system that is accusing them. And obviously, a huge piece of that for us in the U.S. was the Kavanaugh hearings. And wherever you land on that, and interestingly, I run a bipartisan organization. I have Republican and Democrats on my board. I'm one of the few political organizations in America that has it. And a number of my board members are very, very close to Kavanaugh personally, have very deep relationships with him, worked with him in the Bush administration, know, trust, and love this man. And so wherever you stand on whether you believe him or don't believe him, to your point, the structure of what happened on this big global televised stage was a victim narrative on every side, right? It was, he was a victim, she was a victim, everyone's a victim, right? It so diverted any focus from responsibility and responsibility for, writ large, right? The responsibility of our legislators, the responsibility of our society, the responsibility of men. And that has been really painful to watch because I think you see that then played out in all kinds of places and spaces in the US. You see it in a media narrative, which is constant, again, like the men as victims is getting reinforced all the time. And I think we've got to break that. And we've got to be calling out men when they do it and pushing them harder to take some responsibility. It just goes on. And I think we all have some small and large ways in which we can do it. I'll just say one of the things that I've chosen to do is I'm running for office.
Wow.
But I'm going to tell you why. So it's not just because I care about politics, and I do, and I spend a lot of time telling women they should run for office, and so at some point I felt like a hypocrite. But the real reason why I got off the sidelines, to use Kirsten Gillibrand's example, and run for office in my town at a local office, which you might think in the grand scheme of like Me Too and all the things I care about, maybe not such a big deal, my little 28,000 person town in the northern suburbs of New York. Well, it turns out that in my local police department, we have 70 police officers in my police department. There are 4 women. 3 of them have sued the town for sexual harassment. The one woman in our fire department who spent years trying to pass the physical exam in order to qualify as a firefighter was so mercilessly stalked and harassed by one of the men in the department that she had to have a restraining order taken out against him. Our police chief then stepped forward, harassed her put her in an interrogation room and harassed her into resigning because she had raised charges against them. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the organization in the U.S. that enforces discrimination laws, found in favor of the women in my town, and the entirely male government of my little town is using my tax dollars to fight them in court. Okay?
Wow, good for you.
Unacceptable. I did not think I'd be running for office in my small town, but this stuff is showing up everywhere you go. And it shows up and it goes unchecked because there are not enough women in the positions of power and leadership in our towns, in our businesses, et cetera, to call it out and say, absolutely no way, not in my name, and no way are you taking my tax dollars and going and defending these guys who've been abusing women in my town. Unacceptable. So the point is, there are 100 ways every day. And, Wade does it in his way by calling men to account. And I think that's ultimately like the work of our time is finding all of these ways and abilities to call it out. Look, one of the things that's driving me crazy is that what we're starting to see now, especially even among like these super high profile men who lost their jobs over atrocious behavior, they're getting rehabilitated by their male allies in power. I can give you my favorite current example is a guy called Mark Halperin, who was a serial sexual harasser. I had a charming encounter with him myself, so I can attest to this. He was a serial sexual harasser in the media. He had a huge career. He was like a big star in the political media world. He lost his job on a major show and now there's this whole percolating narrative happening about how all the amazing things that he's been doing for the world since he lost his job. And the reason why I know this story is because his friends in the media who are still in their jobs are already trying to rehabilitate his public image and get him back on the air. Get him back into his job. And there's a whole narrative going on around poor victim Mark Halperin, who had such a hard time since he lost his job. He lost everything, right? He lost everything. He was ruined, right? Which, by the way, this is like not true. So, and at some point you go like, there's consequences for behavior. Like, and we have the system is so crazy because so much of it gets, adjudicated in the media, right? In this case, it was adjudicated by his employer who investigated the case. The point is that what happens is, and in so many places, the men go on to have perfectly productive careers. In the US especially, and in many places around the world, the proceedings against the men who have harassed are secret because of secret arbitration clauses or because of company policy. So what happens? They go get other jobs and nobody knows that they were a serial harasser. The women, on the other hand, it winds up being public that they were the ones that they were the accusers, and they often struggle to ever work again. So like we need the men to start calling this for what it is. Like these guys, it just drives me nuts that they're now, because they have power begets more power. The power they had in the first place is now begetting more power for them to rehabilitate their careers and come back just like it never happened before.
Well,
and that we need to be calling out. It is unacceptable. These guys should not be back in positions of power. They lost that chance.
I'm Robin. I'm a BC teacher, a member of the BC Teachers Federation, and I just I want to ask about the role of unions in a workplace in terms of balancing power dynamics. And a number of people have talked in different ways about sexual violence and harassment being a result of power imbalance, but there's always an inherent power imbalance in a workplace. There's the people who run the workplace and there's the people who work in the workplace. And so to be able, it's one thing to have a right to report or a right to ask questions, but it's another thing to have the ability to exercise that right. And in my union, we have really excellent collective agreement language around a harassment-free workplace. And to my mind, that's a very different thing than having a company policy that can be implemented or enforced in a sort of subjective case-to-case way. And having a union also gives workers, and especially workers who are otherwise marginalized, access to justice in a way that may be inaccessible. 100%. If you can't pay a lawyer's fee, you can still go to your union rep and get support. Yes. So I just wonder if you can speak to the power imbalance in unionism.
I am a huge believer in unions. I think they are absolutely essential for women. There has been an all-out assault on the rights of workers to organize right around the world. And that assault has eroded the understanding of the power of how union collective bargaining serves everybody, whether they're union or not. We have weekends because of unions. We have paid sick leave because of unions. We have vacation pay because of unions. Everything that has been a net positive for employees, union or not, is because of unions. But unfortunately, the fact that unions in their organizing then challenge corporations and challenge institutions and challenge governments to be accountable means that they have also been public enemy number one. And I work with a lot of corporations. I have wonderful relationships with them. I'm here because of one of them. But the reality is that where unions have been pushed out of workplaces, workers have not done better. So I think we have underrated as women the power of unions for women's benefit in the workplace in terms of equal pay and a whole bunch of other things. Yep. And we need to focus on that a little bit more. I just want to add one last thing, though, which is in the unions that I have relationships with, most of the leadership in unions is men, even in unions where there are a majority of women, like teachers' unions and others. You still see it's the white male history teachers that step forward to run for the union leadership jobs. So we got to change that. We need the women in union leadership as well as in the unions, but that requires those women to run for those and to really push to represent the women in the unions and represent everybody. So the union by itself is important, but having women's leadership in those unions matters even more.